Very good afternoon to all of you. First of all, thanks to the organizers for putting together this event and calling us all here to discuss this very vital topic about smart electric mobility, EV charging solutions, and energy storage. So I'll be taking you all through the context-setting presentation before my fellow panelists shed much more light in depth upon this topic for today. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is the market landscape and the growth outlook, how the consumer needs are evolving and therefore mandating the need for battery energy storage systems, smart charging, and other things coming into the play. What are also some of the infrastructural challenges that are coming when we are seeing electric mobility scale up? We'll also talk about what are some of the system level solutions that have been introduced to counter some of these challenges. How we can enable true decarbonization and circularity by embracing some of these technologies. And finally, what are some of the technological gaps and how we can be future ready. So starting off, I think India's EV market overview, most of you would anyway understand this, that we've seen a lot of surge in EVs as far as two-wheelers are concerned. Primarily, that was kick-started with the FAME subsidies. On the three-wheeler side also, we've seen steady adoption and high numbers come in, largely led by the e-rickshaw segment, which actually was born out of electric mobility out there. Passenger cars is where we've not seen as much traction build up, and we are still at about 2.5% in terms of penetration. And buses, where also the government plays a role, we are at about 3% over there, and more state transport undertakings now embracing electric mobility. Hopefully, this should go up in the near future. We also see globally, I think very well-known fact, China has been dominating the sales of EVs and also the manufacturing of EVs. Europe and US have seen a bit of stagnation in the recent past, but again, clocking something like 20%, 10%, which is much more than how much we've been able to clock in India. And now, while the stagnation is happening, it's also coming to the fore. What are some of the challenges that people are facing over there? As far as India is concerned, yes, the FAME 1, FAME 2 scheme kick-started it. Then we've seen the EMPS scheme that came in. When we talk of today, the PM eDrive scheme is continuing the push across certain segments or form factors of vehicles, as well as the charging infrastructure. And going forward, our target of 30 at 30 and of a developed India by 2047, which includes a decarbonized fleet, should hopefully spur the numbers as we look into the future as well. When we look at the charging infrastructure, we see there is a mix of AC and DC charging in India. Again, this is largely tilted towards the urban areas, with 70% of the charging infrastructure being in urban areas. We've also seen that, there are a variety of charging locations that have come up. One is the depot charging, which is primarily used by three-wheelers running for fleet companies or by the state transport undertaking buses while they're parked at the depots. Highway charging, which is fast expanding, and this is largely fast chargers, DC fast chargers that are being deployed on highways to cater to four-wheelers as well as commercial vehicles. Residential charging, which has seen some challenges with many RWAs, etc., also creating issues here, and also the local distribution network sometimes not being geared up enough. And finally, destination charging, which is growing in large malls, office spaces, etc. Again, when we look at the split between DC and AC charging, we see that DC is about 40% and AC is about 60%, again having different kilowatt charges in both these categories as well. When we look at the global benchmarks, yes, India does fare better in terms of, about 3.4 EVs per charger, but this data should be looked at slightly more carefully because it does not take into account two-wheelers and three-wheelers, which is a huge booming population of EVs in India when this ratio is calculated, and also does not take into account some of the commercial use cases of EVs. Therefore, this number looks higher, whereas in reality, we need to still do more in terms of expanding our charging infrastructure, and also especially the fast charging infrastructure. And why all this is important, I think from the evolving customer needs, we see that the major pain points for customers around EVs have been some of the longer charging times, which also then lead to range anxiety, also limitations of installation of some of these chargers at their residences, also some of the chargers not being available when you go out there to charge, they've kind of malfunctioned, a fleet downtime in case of commercial fleets when you go for charging, and also highway access gaps are there, which sometimes hinders planning long journeys. And this is where fast charging steps in and can be a solution for many of those problems, as you see on the right-hand side of this slide. Also, fast charging can enable a great use case in terms of smaller batteries. Now, it's a very well-known fact that we don't have the raw material that is needed for batteries within the country, so we continue to import it. Also, we understand that in this quest to increase the range of vehicles, we pack in larger batteries, which means higher imports, also means higher price of the vehicles. If we could enable fast charging with smaller batteries, we could lower the upfront cost of the vehicle, also lower the amount of import content that goes in, and we could have a lot of use cases come in, for example, for e-commerce and delivery fleets, who could look at sort of 3 to 4 charges per day with a smaller battery size of about 3 kilowatt hour and less than 20 minutes of charging. Similarly, for ride-hailing and urban taxis, a use case akin to CNG, wherein you could fast charge to about 80% in about 10 minutes or so, would be something people would start preferring, and also lower the size of the battery. Similarly, intercity and interstate buses, similarly, because they will still have a larger size of the battery, and fast charging could enable faster turnaround times. And in shared two-wheeler services, where, of course, along with three-wheelers, we also see battery swapping is a great alternative, but fast charging could also play its role in reducing the downtime for such fleets. Now, when we talk about fast charging and when it starts happening at scale, what are some of the infrastructural challenges that we face? So you see on the graph on the left-hand side, this shows the peak consumption pattern for the month of January, where, say, there is no AC load. So you see there is a peak that's happening in sort of the 8 to 14 hours time cycle. Now, if our charging demand also coincides with these peaks, it can create challenges, because we've seen that when it comes to charging, the period 1, as shown on this slide, is when home charging, fleet depot charging largely happens. In period 2 is when public or semi-public charging happens. And period 3 is when home charging, public, semi-public, all of this starts happening. So when you compare that in the summer months, in the period 3, you'll have a peak of charging as well as a peak from, the other loads on the grid, which can create issues. One, in terms of generation, how do you cater to those spikes? Do you install so much of capacity? And then how do you meet sort of the unpredictable EV demand that's coming in? And also from the transmission and distribution equipment standpoint as well, you'll have transformer overloads, voltage stability issues, and also increase in base loads requiring upgradation of the entire network. We've seen some cases come out in India as well, like in Bangalore. There was an unplanned and uncontrolled EV charging in 136 stations on, causing a lot of stress on the 11 kilowatt volt feeders. And of course, the solution was a grid upgrade, transformer and cable replacement, installation of harmonic filters. Similarly, we've seen cases like that happen in Delhi and Rajasthan as well. And also internationally in California, this was seen, and also in Germany. And they've come up with solutions like they integrated the battery energy storage systems in California, and in Germany, they've come up with phase balancing strategies, deployment of 3-phase chargers instead of single-phase chargers, and also strong grid monitoring. So what are some of the solutions that we see to address this problem? Well, it's threefold. One is integration of smart charging, which manages the peak grid load by managing the power supply based on the time of use and effective load on the distribution system and grid. The second is augmenting battery energy storage systems with the EV supply equipment, which improves the reliability of the power supply and balances peak grid loads. And the last one is enabling vehicle-to-everything integration, so utilizing the EV battery to feed the electric grid as an auxiliary source for powering home usage or for charging supply equipment for other EVs as well. Let's get into a little bit details on each one of them, starting with what we call smart charging. It's basically managing the demand by adjusting the energy consumption by charging stations, which is again enabled by the data sharing across the grid, the DISCOMs charging stations, and the EVs. And what it can do is the grid can real-time do the monitoring and load forecasting. So the idea is to flatten out, the peak load, or hey junk as we call it, so not any peaks coming in. The DISCOMs could implement dynamic time of use tariffs so that people are charging more when the tariffs are low, which also corresponds with the off-grid hours. Charging stations, installation of bidirectional chargers, which could reduce energy costs and also lead to higher asset utilization, where they could feed back to the grid whenever the load is higher, and also integrating EVs with bidirectional charging, which could be for charging other EVs, also feeding back to the grid. They could store the energy which is available at the off-peak hours and feed back to the grid, which could also lead to another revenue stream, for example. We've seen this happen globally. The UK has, for example, mandated all new EV home charging points from 2022 to have the smart functionality. China, which has seen large-scale infrastructure and large EV fleets, has also rolled out a policy for smart charging as part of the 5-year plan. The EU is also following up with similar measures, and also Brazil, where EV are fast increasing, is also coming up with some such policies. And similarly, it also for India, to introduction of the smart charging communication protocols, time of use tariffs, creating V2G and smart charging guidelines would be important, so that the various players in the ecosystem can also ramp up accordingly. And at the same time, phase-wise implementation of this, targeting the new urban areas or the areas where we are finding a surge in demand for EV charging could be the right starting point to implement some of these things in India. Coming to the next solution, which is augmenting with BESS, I think pretty simple to understand that, the BESS, the battery energy storage system, is storing the low-cost electricity from the grid during the off-peak hours, and it's feeding back to the grid when there is a peak demand. Right? It, of course, leads to a lot of benefits for all the stakeholders. For example, for the DISCOMs, optimization of the peak load spikes, reduced grid congestion, also enables a transitional phase before infra upgrades really happen. For the charging point operators, the CPOs, it reduces the overall energy cost, enables fast charging with also in weak grid locations. And for the EV users, it gives a high reliable access to fast charging. Again, for this to be enabled, we need to include BESS in the national EV infra policy and tariff design. Also prioritization of BESS deployment in grid-constrained and high-demand sites, and finally also incentivizing domestic BESS manufacturing, as well as using second life of batteries from EVs for this, which I'll touch upon a little later in the presentation as well. Again, we see a lot of use cases of this come in, where in some cases this is at kilowatt scale, but some cases also at megawatt scale BESS, for example, in California, and we've seen that in Germany, we've seen that in China, and also India is planning to utilize second life of batteries for BESS. V2X, finally, coming to this one, starting with vehicle to grid, where, you could manage the urban power peaks. Also, it could lead to balancing of the grid for DISCOMs if the state transport EV fleets can feed back to the grid during the peak hours. Also, bidirectional charges, which is the vehicle to home. This could be used as backup power from vehicles during power outages. Vehicle to load, which is a use case for remote sites, for camping, etc. And also vehicle to vehicle, which could also come in use, for example, rescue vehicles if you run out of charge on a highway, etc. Here again, there are a lot of examples. I think of the V2G is the Nissan Leaf, which has been effectively deployed for this. Vehicle to home is, for example, the F-150 Lightning. Vehicle to load for camping, etc., is the Kia EV9. So we do see these use cases come in, and hopefully we'll start seeing more of these come within the country as well. Finally, talking about enabling true decarbonization and circularity, if you look at the left-hand side of this graph, we'll see that 76% of the emissions over the life cycle of an EV come from the electricity that is coming from the grid, which in many cases is not coming from renewable power. For us to be able to eliminate this, if the EVs are just charged by renewable energy, then this can lead to a lot of decarbonization. Coupled with this is the fact that even the manufacturing of batteries is a process that leads to a lot of emissions. And again, here with fast charging, we can reduce the size of the batteries, or have some of the second life of batteries also come in. That could lead to further decarbonization in addition to charging with renewable energy. So both these things taken into account can lead us to a true green economy with the use of EVs. Again, there are a lot of use cases that are coming in with integration with BESS and distributed renewables, which allow charging stations to act like virtual power plants, which can store, dispatch, or delay energy use based on the grid needs and market signals. This could be in the form of, say, the grid managed solutions, which are the first three from the left, could be like in the form of network charging, where, a utility or charging network where users subscribe to EV charging plans backed by renewable energy. Or it is in terms of charging with excess renewable, which is more of a dynamic system, depending on the season, depending on the day. Whenever renewable power is high, say on a windy day, on a more sunny day, the tariffs are changed in real time. Then also shift charging, which also encourages users to charge during off-peak hours or when renewable generation is high. And finally is, on-site is the on-site renewables, which is not dependent on the grid. Of course, this is completely, using a renewable energy source coupled with the BESS, and that's powering EVs directly. Again, we see a lot of use cases of this. For example, Austin Energy on network charging, Hawaiian Electric, which charges with excess renewables on the day that solar generation peaks in Hawaii. We've seen Great River Energy, which has practiced shift charging over the years, and also Tesla with its solar roof or solar panels alongside wall connector to directly charge their EVs, which is an example of the on-site renewables. Also, when we talk about circularity in the sense of electric vehicles, I think batteries is a key component of that. Here again, using batteries, the second life of batteries for BESS could lead to better resale value for the vehicles and also extend the life that the batteries remain in use. And in addition, of course, is the complete, sort of recycling of batteries that I just touched upon, which is inherently a greener process. And for a country like ours, which does not have the raw materials, urban mining or recycling of batteries is a vital component of our EV vision. Lastly, technological gaps and future readiness. I think for smart charging to be enabled and shift towards high voltage systems, we'll need to look at these four aspects. In terms of the EV platforms, they need to be compatible for multi-voltage support or adaptive converters, which will be in the form of advanced connectors, insulations, and protection systems. In terms of the battery chemistries, they need to have a longer life, and inherently we see LFP batteries or LTO or NTO batteries being suitable for this. And also the batteries need to have a high C rate so as to be able to get fast charge without any degradation. The BMS, which is really going to be the brain between the smart charging system and the vehicle, needs to do more and more of real-time tracking of state of charge and health, and also interact with the external signals like tariffs, like presence of energy, or how the grid is performing at that time, and things like that. And finally, in terms of charging standards, again, we would need to look at harmonizing some of these so as to be able to have seamless compatibility between OEMs and between some of the solutions that we are talking about, which can help prevent the peaks that were mentioned earlier in the presentation. With that, I reach the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. Also, with that, to continue the discussion forward, may I now call upon Mr. Anurag Johri to please come forward and share his thoughts.